Chapter 51, Dallas Scott. Shortly after Dallas Scott was taken from Marion to the hole in Leavenworth, he felt sharp pains in his stomach. When he tried to get out of his bunk, his legs went out from under him and he had to crawl to the toilet. There was blood in his vomit. At first, he figured he had food poisoning, but when no one else in the hole became ill, he knew that it was his chronic hepatitis flaring up. Scott had been sick like this before. 2 years earlier, his legs, ankles, and feet had swollen to nearly double their normal size, and he had become so ill that doctors sent him to the Bureau's medical center in Springfield, where he was bedridden for 3 months. As Scott lay shivering in his bunk in the hole, he decided that he was about to die. Years of drug and alcohol abuse were finally about to kill him. Yet, even though he continued to vomit and shake, he refused to let the guards take him to the hospital. The only professionals that Scott trusted less than lawyers were doctors, especially those who worked for the Bureau. He sipped water to prevent dehydration and stubbornly remained in his cell. One afternoon, a guard brought him a certified letter from the U.S. magistrate in Sacramento who agreed to review Scott's motion for a new trial on his 1976 bank robbery conviction. Inside was a 10-page ruling, but Scott only got through the first paragraph before he was swearing. His appeal had been rejected. His claim that he had been denied a fair trial because prosecutors had never told him about the mysterious fingerprints on the robbery weapon and because part of his trial transcript had not been recorded were unfortunate mistakes, the magistrate wrote, but they were also harmless. The unidentified fingerprints found on the pistol could have belonged to Scott's wife, since Scott had testified earlier that the gun belonged to her. The fingerprints at the bank, thought to be the robbers, could have belonged to customers. Although this court does not condone the prosecution's failure to disclose the fingerprint information, it is unlikely that the fingerprint evidence would have made any difference in Scott's ultimate conviction, said the ruling. There was other evidence that pointed to Scott. Several witnesses had testified that the robber talked in a funny way, and Scott had a unique Texas accent. The most common denomination of money stolen from the bank was $1 bills. And 2 hours after the robbery, Scott had redeemed a Citizens Band radio from a pawn shop by paying $45 in $1 bills. The magistrate acknowledged that such evidence was circumstantial, but when it was added together, it pointed towards Scott as the robber. There was no comment about why none of the witnesses had mentioned Scott's prison tattoos when they described the robber. Apparently, the magistrate had thought this was unimportant. The fact that part of the court transcript was missing also wasn't sufficient grounds for a new trial, the ruling stated, because the material wasn't that relevant to the trial. I had been stretched out flat on my back for 4 days, about half expecting old Scratch to come knocking at the door, Scott recalled. But when they hit me with the deal from California, shot straight up off the bunk, cussed, stomped around the cell for a while, then hit the shower and spent 16 hours digging through my trial transcripts, briefs, case law, notes, etc. Suddenly, I felt pretty good. You see, I knew this asshole was wrong. I had them beat at their own game, and I wasn't going to die before I proved them wrong. Scott went to work on an appeal of the magistrate's ruling. He also sent an angry letter to the attorney whom the magistrate had forced him to hire. Scott had borrowed $5,000 from friends outside the prison in order to comply with the order that he be represented at the court hearing. The attorney had filed all the proper court documents and had represented Scott before the magistrate, but Scott was unsatisfied with his performance and he wanted him to know it. "You are a spineless coward and a lying piece of shit," Scott wrote in a letter, firing the lawyer. By the time Scott had finished mailing the proper forms to appeal the magistrate's ruling, it was time for him to be tried in Topeka on the drug smuggling charges. He wanted to act as his own attorney in the case, but the judge wouldn't allow it either. And Mark Works, a 27-year-old lawyer fresh out of Topeka Law School, was assigned to the case. Works, who had never before represented an inmate and had little experience in criminal cases, didn't have much to work with, especially after federal prosecutors played the tape recording of Scott's telephone call threatening Bill Hutchinson's girlfriend. Scott had always denied that it was his voice on the tape, but there was no mistaking his accent when prosecutors played the tape for the jurors. By the second day of the trial, he realized he was losing, and he asked that Works be fired as his attorney. The judge denied his request. Scott announced that he wanted to call several inmates from Marion to testify on his behalf, as well as some from Leavenworth. Federal prosecutors immediately claimed that Scott was simply trying to give his buddies a chance to get away from Marion so they could attempt an escape. When the judge denied the request, Scott threw down his pencil and shouted, "This is bullshit. This motherfucker is denying all my witnesses." Two U.S. Marshals scrambled to the defense table. The next day, the judge permitted Scott to call several inmates, but only from Leavenworth. The jury found Scott guilty, and the judge sentenced him to 210 months, 17 and a half years, and a fine of $750 for attempting to smuggle $500 worth of heroin into the prison. Damn. Under the new drug sentencing laws, Scott had to serve at least 15 years of the sentence, and it wouldn't start until he had completed the 6 years that were still hanging over his head from his conviction for his 1976 bank robbery. Back in the hole at the hot house, Scott was incredulous. The trial was a railroad job, he complained, not because he was innocent, evidence at the trial proved otherwise, but because he didn't feel the judge and prosecutors had played fair. If I had been able to defend myself or could have afforded an expensive lawyer, I'd have gotten off, Scott complained. This is what sucks about this bullshit system of ours. I should get to play by the same rules as everyone else, but because I don't have the money and am tagged as a prison gang member, I don't. When you're in a supermarket with a ham in your arms and there are 6 people in front of you, each with a ham, and the clerk says, "That will be $5 to each of them," and then she comes to you and says, "That will be $15, that is not fair. You should have to pay the same price as everyone else, but everyone always wants me to pay more." A few days after his conviction, guards told Scott that he had a visitor. He assumed it was Mark Works coming to say goodbye. Despite the fact that Scott had wanted the young attorney fired, he liked Works. But waiting in the visiting room were Scott's daughter, Star, and his 2 granddaughters, ages 2 and 3. It was the first time that Scott had seen his grandchildren, and he spent the entire day bouncing the 2 girls on his knees, playing games with them, and fetching them treats from the candy machine. "I looked like I had been through a war by the time I got back to the cell," he said, later proudly. The visit had caused a flood of memories. "When I was in prison in Lompoc, my wife came to see me with my son, who was then 14, Scott recalled. "I remember looking at that kid, and he looked just like me, and I could hear my voice in his voice. And he was a pretty hep kid, a sharp kid, and we were bullshitting, and all of a sudden, I looked at him and thought, damn, I was 14 the first time I went into the Dallas County Jail. I'm looking at my kid and I think, he has got to be similar to what I look like, and he looks like a baby to me. It set me back because I wondered, how in the hell did I survive back then? How did I make it all those years? It also made me sad because I realized that I've spent my entire fucking life behind bars. I've been convicted of 2 lousy bank robberies, yet I've never really gotten out of prison. I really have missed everything a normal person gets to do, like raise kids and just walk the streets." There was a sadness to his voice. "This gets so old. You get tired of all the silly ass games, the young bucks who come in here thinking they've discovered something new by being tough, the fucking guards, the bureau, always fucking with you. But after all these years, what else do I got? If I were to get out tomorrow, do you actually think I could change? You think the government is going to give me Social Security? You think I'm going to be happy working at some fast food joint flipping burgers with teenage kids? Fuck no. I went down a path a long time ago, and all them doors have been closed, but I never thought it'd end up this way. I never thought I'd spend my life in prison." Scott knew that he was going to be sent back to Marion. He also knew that even if he did somehow prevail and get his 1976 bank robbery conviction overturned, he still faced another 17 and a half years in jail, and that was equivalent to a death sentence. His recent bout with hepatitis had reminded him of his own frailty. He recalled the doctor's estimate of his life expectancy back in 1983 when they had first diagnosed his liver problem. 10 more years at most. He was going to die in prison. probably Marion. I'm going to keep fighting them, he said. I ain't dying on someone else's schedule. I know I may never make it out of here. It don't look like it now. The rest of my life, I am probably going to spend in a cell locked up 23 hours a day by myself. But with all my failures by society standards, I'm not a failure to me, in my own eyes, and that's what really counts. Have I robbed banks? Yeah, fuck yes. Am I an outlaw? Yeah, fuck yes. But so what? You think I invented stealing? When I'm laying down, sucking that last breath of air, I'll be doing it alone. And I'm the only one that I got to answer to. And when that time comes, and I'm thinking about my life, the robberies and this and that, I'll be able to say, hey, I can live with that. I never harmed anyone, never stole from anyone poorer than me, never went out of my way to fuck with anybody, and I never let the man beat me. I never ratted on anybody, never kissed a guard's ass. I stuck with my principles. They sure as hell aren't society's principles, but I stuck with them, and that means I can die with a clear conscience. A few days later, Scott was transferred to Marion.